Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on the first of 3 Infosec Edge Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification webcasts. My name is Jeff Peters, and I'll be moderating today's session, which is all about CMMC Career Paths and how to become a CMMC Certified Assessor, as well as some other positions related to CMMC. I'm going to introduce our panel here in just a moment, but first we'd like to share a couple tips to make this a more interactive and engaging experience for our live attendees. All live attendees are on listen-only mode. This means that you're muted, but you're more than welcome to ask questions at any time by typing them into the control panel's question feature. We also had about a dozen CMMC questions submitted to our webinars@infosecinstitute.com email, so we plan to spend about half the time today answering all your career-related CMMC questions. Now let's meet our panel. On the panel today, we have Leighton Johnson. He is the CTO of Information Security Forensics Management Team, a provider of cybersecurity and forensics consulting and certification training. He has presented security and forensics lectures, conference presentations, training events, and seminars all across the US, Asia, and Europe, and he has over 40 years experience with his primary focus areas including computer security, information operations and assurance, incident response and forensics investigations, testing systems using the software system development lifecycle, systems engineering and integration activities, database administration, and cyber defense. He is also a certified CMMC provisional assessor. Mrs. Stacy Hyde-Brinkley is the Vice President of Compliance Solutions and Services at CASC, and she has more than 25 years experience as an information security professional. Her background includes building and securing networks with expertise in establishing and implementing streamlined cybersecurity programs. She holds numerous cyber certifications and is also a certified CMMC provisional assessor, as well as a DoD RMF assessor. Her expertise of the cyber domain includes technical aspects such as ensuring proper implementation of security controls and hardening networks, as well as non-technical and policy implementation. So with that, yeah, thank you both, Leighton and Stacy, for joining us today.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff.
So just before we dive into it, just a real quick reminder of the flow today. We actually have 3 CMMC sessions, and today's is going to be all about career opportunities related to CMMC, how those different roles fit into the CMMC ecosystem, and what the certification and training timelines are like for those various roles. If you have questions about how CMMC may affect your particular organization or details of what the actual assessment process is going to be like, we're going to cover those in our upcoming webcasts. So with that, let's go ahead and jump right into it. We're going to start, maybe spend about 10 minutes talking about the cybersecurity maturity model certification, just in general, what it is, so that we're all on the same page before we jump into the different careers. So why don't we start by providing a little background on CMMC and why this model was created. Leighton, we can start with you.
Okay, basically, the Department of Defense over the last 5 or 6 years has determined that there's an awful lot of intellectual property that they are paying for that's being removed, stolen, lost, etc. From their contractor base. Now, this contractor base is huge. It's over 300,000 companies that provide services, provide products to the Department of Defense on a variety of contracts all across all of the components, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, general to DoD, all sorts of agencies that do these efforts. Now, we know that because of all of this theft of intellectual property, the Department of Defense has determined that their supply chain has a very large risk around not being safe, secure, and data going out the door when it shouldn't be going out the door. And so in order to reduce this risk, the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment has developed the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Program for all of the defense contractors that will sustain and update and manage the security as well as the safety of the cybersecurity of each of these efforts in their contract efforts. So it's starting from a contracts perspective first and foremost. And so it's designed to go against new contracts as they come available over the next 5 years.
Yeah, did you have anything you wanted to add to that, Stacy?
Yeah, I believe also it will be included in renewal contracts also. So we need to keep your eyes out for those updates.
Great. So my understanding is that the whole goal of CMMC is really about protecting these two types of information, and correct me if I'm wrong, but federal contract information and controlled unclassified information. Stacy, could you talk a little bit about what this type of information is, and if I'm correct that that's really the goal of CMMC?
So yeah, there are different levels of CMMC from level 1 to 5. Level 1 talks to FCI. So that's your basic cyber hygiene. So those are folks that might handle contract data, things like that. When you're talking CUI down below, and you all can read what it is, and there are areas where you can go look this up specifically when you want to really know the definitions of what CUI is. But that's level 3. So you have to get through level 1 and level 2 and through level 3 in order to transmit, store, or process CUI data on your network and your assets with your people. So that's basically how that lines up.
Yeah, and I like this slide here, just kind of talking a little bit more about, in addition to just like the types of data that you're protecting, just summarizes really the overall goal of CMMC in terms of the threats and cyber attacks out there. So can you talk a little bit about that, Leighton, just, the overall threats and the goal here?
Well, starting first with the overseas threat, we're talking other nations, we're talking large organizations who want to get the information so that they can either sell it to others or other interested parties or use it for their own purposes, as the case may be. Use it in building whatever they may be building and using this to help cut down the time to delivery, cut down the time to develop. And so if they go out and steal somebody else's information, they don't have to do the research themselves. That's the overseas threat. We see the cyber attacks in general dramatically increasing. I saw recent statistics from Cyber Ventures that talked about that's a $3 trillion a year industry right now, and that's with a T. All right, that's a huge number. Okay, that type of thing around cyber attacks. People have heard of them, ransomware attacks, and those types of things are all parts of those areas where they come in, they either steal your data or they scramble your data. And if that's the case, if they scramble your data, then they ask you for a ransom. And hence it's why it's called ransomware. That's a cyber attack that's really relevant today. We got critical infrastructure attacks. CISA, the national agency under DHS, just issued another alert around critical infrastructure attacks to the grid, to the electric grid. We've had a wide range of these over the last several years, and more they're coming in and showing that there are issues around all of our components that we just every day take for granted, like transportation, like our electricity, like our water, like our phones, etc. That's the critical infrastructure area. Then there's the fact that any one of these could potentially roll into being a national emergency. If the grid went out, as we saw happen in 2003 when we had our Northeast blackout, 1/3 of the country went with no power. That's a national emergency. That type of thing could realistically come from one of these efforts. We've had whole countries' electrical grids attacked in the last few years where they shut down during the middle of winter and they were cold, because they had no power. Yeah, that constitutes a national emergency. And then the idea of this is about understanding how do you recover. I mean, everybody's job in this world is trying to get back to normal operations if something fails, if something happens. And we call that continuity. Sometimes we call it business resiliency. but it's about getting back to normal operations. And so all of that requires planning, requires lots of effort and lots of costs involved in all the organizations that have to do that. So all of these contribute to these CMMC focus points around that supply chain and what's necessary to make sure that everything stays working and is safe and secure.
Great, great. So now that we have a background on CMMC and the threat, let's jump a little bit into the actual model itself for a few minutes, just so everyone understands this before we jump into the career portion. So I have a couple slides here about the CMMC model overview. I guess one of the things that stood out to me when researching CMMC is that the model is new, but the existing practices and processes are pulled from a lot of existing frameworks. So in my understanding is that it's not like someone who's already assessing organizations is starting from scratch. So could you talk to us a little bit more about this model, Stacy, and maybe some of the processes and practices in there and where they come from?
Yeah, so the basic premise of the CMMC comes from the NIST 800-171, okay? When you go up to level 3, for instance, 110 of those 130 controls are actually from NIST. So this is something that folks have been doing, should have been doing, will be doing for the past 3 years, over 3 years actually, per DFAR 7012. So now what we're doing is we're getting rid of the self-attestation that's been going on, and we're actually going out making sure that these folks are doing that. So when you look at the basic cyber hygiene performed, level 1, we talked about that earlier, that's FCI. Level 2 gets you closer to level 3. That's where you start with the processes and the documentation needed to show the maturity levels and that you've been doing this and that you know how you need to do this and how you need to train your people and have your processes in place. And then level 3 is actually good cyber hygiene, where it's managed, where you have a plan, and then you have all your other processes, your procedures and policies. And then it continues to level 4 and 5. So this is really important because you're showing a progression of security. You're showing that you are building up to where you have a strong defense about all those things that Leighton just talked about, critical infrastructure, creating national emergencies, coming all the way back around to the 17 domains of protecting people, process, technology, security awareness. There's so many areas in here. And it all really goes back to the NIST 800-171 with the Delta 20 for CMMC.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to point out for those on the call who are wondering where they fit into this ecosystem in terms of like careers, that as an assessor, you'd be the one going into the organization and basically assessing them against these levels here. So on this slide here on the left, we have the 5 different processes going from perform to optimizing that Stacy was just talking about, and then on the right here we have the different practice levels and the number of practices, with each one with 171 total for level 5. So is there anything you wanted to call out or mention here with regard to CMMC levels, Leighton?
Well, it starts with the basic cyber hygiene. Do you manage your access from your people? Do you have antivirus? Do you have reporting on what's going on your system so in case something's going wrong? Basic physical security on getting to the equipment and what you're doing it with. That's all basic cyber hygiene. That's 17 different practices in 6 areas we're going to talk about. But that's all that is that's why it's called basic. Okay, it's just basic things that people do. Do you log into your computer, or do you even have a password on your computer? Those types of really basic things that are out there. When we move to that intermediate, we're doing a staging of the 171 controls. First, we do 55, then we do 58 at level 3. So we're going to add the 110 that are found in 171 over 2 steps. First with intermediate cyber hygiene, then with good cyber hygiene when we go from level 2 to level 3. And that then ends up with us being at level 3, 130 areas across 17 different domains, as they call them. And areas of coverage that we need to follow through and understand at level 3. Now, they're expecting from DoD that most people are going to do level 1, level 2, or level 3, period. And in fact, they expect the most contractors out there, more than half, are going to be at level 1 only, as far as that goes, in what they need to do and what they have to work with. But there are extra 2 levels, level 4 and level 5, that are based on NIST Special Publication 800-172, okay, which used to be 171B and then they renamed it, that are additional controls that are proactive, specialized controls around that first element I talked about in that supply chain risk area, those outside attackers who are coming after the intellectual property for whatever purpose. These are those special areas where they're proactive, they're advanced, they're progressive efforts, and they're literally expecting only 1% of all defense contractors to have to do level 4 and level 5 together. Okay, so 99% are going to be level 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, and on the next slide here, we have those 17 domains that Leighton and Stacy were talking about. Is there, yeah, I guess I find this really useful because it can be a little overwhelming thinking, oh, there's 171 practices and all these things you have to do. So this is just a nice grouping of like the 17 different buckets. Just wondering if there's anything worth pointing out here, you know, for those people who are going to be helping out their organizations or actually doing these assessments. Is there any particular domain or certain areas within here that you think is worth highlighting for the people on the call?
Sure. Access control, number 1. Okay. This is how everybody gets in. This is how everybody does what they do. This is how they're overseen when they're doing it. This is the control. This particular domain has the most practices, 22, in and of itself at the 3 levels. It is the one that is the most critical for everybody on how do the bad guys get in and how do you keep them from getting in. And that's all around access control first and foremost, is all of that. Now, of course, that's tied to the identification and authentication family, because of course, to be able to get on, you got to know, the system needs to know who you are, and that comes from identification and authentication. So those two go together. And so those are the ones that we always have to look at and understand first before you even get to anything else, because this is the one that is the most critical. It's also, in today's world, the one that's the most attacked.
Awesome. So yeah, let's move on to the CMMC ecosystem that's being built to support this new framework. So on this chart here, just to kind of set the stage, at the top is CMMC AB. If you're unfamiliar with them, they are an independent accreditation entity that was created in January 2020, and they're responsible for really everything related to CMMC in terms of establishing, maintaining, controlling, and administrating, you know, all the aspects of it. And that includes the assessment, certification, training, and accreditation process. And then within the CMMC ecosystem, we have a few different types of organizations, including RPOs, C3PAOs, OSCs, LPPs, LTPs. So yeah, a lot of different acronyms in there. If you're not familiar, you know, it could be a little confusing. So why don't we maybe go from left to right and talk about each of these 4 types of organizations. Start with you, Stacy. Like, what is a registered provider organization? What do they do? All that good stuff.
So an RPO, or a registered provider organization, they have registered practitioners who deliver consulting services. So those might be like MSPs and things like that. They go out and do maybe gap assessments, pre-assessments, seeing where you are going from NIST to CMMC. Because as you know, CMMC's pass-fail. NIST, you could have a POAM. So a lot of people need a lot of help getting there. The C3PAOs, and CASC is a C3PAO, is a third-party assessor organization for CMMC, and we deliver the formal assessments. Now, we also do gaps and pre's, but we cannot do the formal assessment if we do those gaps and pre's. Another C3PAO needs to do that. We have a strict code of conduct we go by. And then you have the organizations seeking certification. So those are the contractors that will go into the CMMC AB site and choose in the marketplace a C3PAO to do their formal assessment, or an RPO to do their gap or their pre-assessment. And then you have the licensed publishing partners and the LTPs, licensed training providers. So you have those writing the documentation, and then you have those providing the training for those. Leighton knows it way better than I do.
Yeah, I guess the big question that I had, and I think others might, is just like the difference between these RPOs and C3PAOs. You know, like it says RPOs
Okay.
on the slide, you know, they provide consulting and advice. I guess is that a required step in the process? Do I need a consultant
Okay.
or?
No, Jeff.
Go ahead.
Okay, an RPO is there to do gap analysis for those organizations that don't understand what they have to do or how to get there. Okay, and so they're the people who help pre-assessment, not at the assessment time, but pre-assessment. They're the ones that help the various different large, medium, small contractors, whatever they might be, on identifying what's in their area, what's covered, what's not covered, helping the organizations to get ready, okay, for an assessment. They're not there to provide an assessment. They're there to help them, give advice. What do they need to put in? What don't they need to have? What should they cover? What shouldn't they cover? It's all about gap. What do they have versus what does CMMC need? Okay, that type of thing. And that's what RPOs are about. C3PAOs, on the other hand, have two roles. Number one, their primary role is, as Stacy says, to do the assessments, to do the official assessment under contract via the CMMC marketplace against the contracting organizations, the companies that need to have a CMMC level rating. That's their primary job. Their secondary job is when they have the ability, they will advise different companies, but not the same, different companies on those efforts as well. They can do the same things that an RPO can do. It's just that that's a secondary role. They can do it, but it's a secondary role. Their primary role is to conduct the actual assessment, the provisional assessment. The regular certified assessors will be functioning through C3PAOs, okay, as part of those processes. Now, everybody who needs a certification is an OSC. That's all the contractors. That's the 300,000 of them that are out there. That's what an OSC is they're the ones needing the CMMC certification.
Perfect. Yeah, and on the next slide here, it's really similar, but just, you know, I thought it'd be good to talk a little bit about in terms of careers, way people work. Obviously, we could talk a little bit about how Infosec is a licensed publishing partner and a licensed training provider. So Leighton, I'm sure, is really familiar with this space. Has been, you know, since he's one of our instructors here. But yeah, can we talk just a little bit about, you know, we'll get more into the specific careers and, you know, how to become a registered practitioner and certified assessor and all that shortly, but just to kind of set the stage for like where these individuals would work, you know, what types of careers that they would have, you know, what they would do at each of these organizations. Can we speak a little bit about that? Start with you, Stacy, you know, maybe talk a little bit about what it is that your organization does and, you know, what the actual day-to-day is like.
Right. So, so as a C3PAO, right now we're still doing pre-assessments and gaps because the formal assessments obviously have not started yet. But we're also ramping up our staff. I'm a certified provisional assessor, as is Leighton, and so we are actually training other people to be ready to get trained. Right. So. Basically, a lot of our assessors that we have on site are RMF assessors, so they're very familiar with not only NIST 800-171, but the DoD. We actually do assessments to 853 and CNSS 1253 at a higher level. So what we're doing is we're prepping, we're getting ready, we're getting other companies ready, and to be quite honest, we are ourselves waiting to get assessed by the DIVCAC DCMA. So we're going through what the OSCs are going to be going through. So great, right? So we'll be able to know not only from our training as provisional assessors, but going through the actual process ourselves of going through the assessment and getting our folks trained. So we started going through the application process to get CPs and CAs out there in the field.
Okay, and I'll pick up since I run an RPO. What we've been doing for the last 6 months, once we got listed as an RPO in my organization, is actually providing those consulting services gaps, doing gap analyses for organizations, letting them know how far away they are from a CMMC or how close they are, going through their efforts, identifying potential areas that they need to enhance, potential areas they need to cover that where they hadn't covered beforehand, that type of thing as an RPO. As part of those processes, we of course have multiple, I have 3 RPOs and 2 provisional assessors that I work with on a constant basis already. I support C3POs. I think I'm signed up with like 4 or 5. The big thing about assessors, as we'll talk about, is they're individually licensed. So they don't necessarily get licensed by company, they get licensed by individual. Now, in the licensed publishing partner side and the licensed training providers side, there are 14 licensed publishing partners right now, more to be expected, who are drafting in accordance with CMMC AB guidance, the actual training materials for everybody that you're going to see in our next couple slides. And they are going to be covering all the different training that's going to be put together as building the training materials. Okay, so that the training providers, whatever training organization may be there, is allowed to use that material. They can't create their own and still be in compliance. They have to use only the material that comes from an LPP in order to do that. Now, a licensed training provider is any training organization, professional, collegiate, academic, whatever, that's out there that works through their process of getting certified, licensed to provide CMMC training. They can do it in the format that they choose. It's not automatically demanded that they only teach in one way. They can do it through virtual reality, they can do it through lecture, they can do it through video vignettes, whatever they want to do. That's up to the training provider, so long as they cover all the material that's been delivered to them by the publishing partner, which has been approved by CMMC AB.
Perfect. So the next slide here just kind of covers, I guess, how I see it as the different potential career paths within the ecosystem. So feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I would imagine the assessor career path is the main one, and we'll talk a little bit more in detail about the CCP and CCA on the coming slides. But essentially, the certified professional is like the baseline certification. If you want to become an assessor, if you want to become an instructor. Then obviously some people want to become instructors. That's like a whole separate career path. If you want to be the one training the assessors, or even a master instructor training the instructors who are training the assessors. But then there's also this other group of professionals, which would be like registered practitioners, which don't necessarily have like that certification exam. And then you could have like CMMC certified professionals, like we mentioned, you could just like work at an OSE or sort of be a subject matter expert, want that certification. So yeah, curious if you both sort of see the career opportunities the same way that's outlined on the slide here. Stacey, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that we do have that the CMMCAB, that they do have an entry-level certification. I think this is really important. It's a good stepping off point for folks coming into the field or changing careers, right, into security, into cybersecurity, because they will really grasp the knowledge of the 800-171 and everything that entails, right? You've got a lot of security solutions that you've got to implement, that you have to train how to implement and to make sure these are implemented properly. So when you do an assessment, right, when you're entry-level certification, you can go in there with a CA, because you need to go in with a CA. So far right now it's 3 people for level 3.
Right.
It's fluid, but so it's a CA with 2 folks. So, and then you go through your CCA 1, 3, and 5. And every person has to do that. Even provisional assessors have to go through the training again up to level 3. So it's going to be interesting. I think it's going to be fun, especially if I get Leighton as my teacher.
Yeah, and we do have a bunch of questions coming in, so just a quick follow-up on that. One of the questions from
Sure.
Stacy here is that she wanted to know, what is the entry-level certification you were talking about? Is it the RP or the CCP?
It is CCP.
The very first one right there, Certified CMMC Professional.
Perfect. So another question that we have come in that I thought was interesting, because I was a little bit confused the same way, is as you can see here for the assessors, we have level 1, level 3, level 5.
Right.
So it seems like level 2 and level 4 are a little bit kind of wishy-washy. And so we had someone actually asked, Shane asked, why is there even a maturity level 2 or maturity level 4?
Well, the maturity level 2 and level 4 are just interim. We didn't want to have to teach basically each one assessment independently. So what happens is that a level 3 assessor or instructor, either way, a level 3 assessor can assess level 1, level 2, and level 3. Okay, level 1 can only do one, level 1. Level 3 can do 1, 2, or 3. A level 5 can do assessments at all 5 levels. So they can do a level 4, they could do a level 2, they could do a level 3, they can do a level 5. The reason for that is the CMMC model is a cumulative model, and the efforts there is everything that you do at a lower level, you have to include at an upper level, as the way the CMMC model is designed and built and part of those processes. And I know our next session in 2 weeks is about that, but the idea of this is that it's cumulative. So when you look at 3, you're actually doing 1, 2, and 3. When you look at 5, you're doing 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. You can do any one of them as part of those efforts as it starts. Now, in order to be a CCA1, however, you have to have the CCP first. So it's not only the entry level, it is the foundational level certification for the entire ecosystem for anybody. Okay, so everybody starts as a CCP. And so that will obviously be the most classes taught because everybody's got to start there. That will be, and the basic construct behind a CCP, as we'll talk about here, is they can do whatever to support the organization they're working for, or support assessors, or support instructors, as the case may be throughout, but they have a certified level of understanding as a CCP. So that's why we say it's the foundational one for everybody.
Great. We do have a couple of questions coming in about the marketplace. So I just want to let people know that, yes, there is a CMMC AB marketplace. If you just go to, I think it's CMMC-AB.org, right at the top there, there's a link for the marketplace, and you can see the approved.
They don't even have the dash in there anymore. They just call it CMMCAB.org.
Perfect. But yeah, is there, I guess the takeaway there is, all this stuff is on the CMMC AB website. And is there anything you want to add about the marketplace that could be helpful for people on the call?
Anybody and everybody who is a assessor is listed there. Anybody and everybody who is a RPO, officially registered with CMMC, is listed there. Yeah, the link is right, Camille, that's the right link. And then anybody and everybody who's a C3PO is listed there. They all are listed there. That's their official location. That's where you have to go in order to communicate with a C3PO or an RPO or one of the assessors.
Perfect. So let's move on here. We have about 25 minutes left. Let's spend a few minutes talking about each of these individual ones. I think that'll probably answer a lot of the questions that are coming in. Really, the 3 main roles we're going to focus on today are the registered practitioner, the certified professional, and the certified assessor. A lot of like the OSC stuff and C3POs, we'll cover in our next session. We want to make sure we really dig into the career stuff today and get all those questions answered. So yeah, we've talked a little bit about registered practitioners and how they work for RPOs. Is there anything, like being a registered practitioner, like process-wise, or, I'm sure there's a lot of questions about how to become a registered practitioner, like what are the requirements, things like that. Anything worth highlighting there, Stacy?
I mean, it's pretty clear. I mean, you just need to actually be authorized from the CMMC AB. So you register online at the website over there at cmmcab.org. And you actually have, Leighton, what is it, a day training? Is it still a day training?
Yeah, it's 8 hours.
Yeah, it's 1 day training.
12 hours. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
and then
for the most part, it's video training too.
Yeah, it's online. And then go ahead and pass a background check, and then you sign your code of conduct. And then you are an RP. So you can go and have that bit of knowledge to do your pre-assessments and gaps and things like that. And then you're part of the CMMC ecosystem. So that's really what that's about.
Go ahead.
The one unique thing about RPs today, right now, is that RPs can assist provisional assessors during the provisional period, this next year and a half, until everything is finally all out and everybody as a C3PO is out there, assisting provisional assessors in doing those initial assessments under the DoD construct. Once that period is completed and it goes to a regular CMMC certified professional, certified assessor activity, the CCPs and the CCA1s and CCA3s, then the registered practitioners will go back to being just consultants, okay, and not being able to assist the provisional assessors. But they're doing this to help man up the organizations to be able, because they got so many of these organizations that they're trying to get put in place initially. And because of that, we're talking, there's only 15 potential contracts that have it in this fiscal year right now. But that constitutes somewhere between 750 and 1,000 companies just in those 15 contracts, because of all the supply chain, because of all the subcontract efforts. And that's why they put this registered practitioner effort together, is to be able to work through the initial burst that needs to be conducted initially.
Yeah, and one of the questions that came in from Vincent is the pros and cons between being an RP or a CCP. So I think this is probably a good time to talk about, the difference, because we just talked about registered practitioners. So what is the difference when you move up to the CCP level?
Number one, your qualifications change. Number two, you get formal training from an LTP in order to conduct it. Right now, all the ones I've seen, the CCP class is 5 days. It's not 8 hours, it's 5 days. There is a formal exam at the end of it that they have to pass in order to gain this credential. As part of those efforts, you have to take mandatory CUI training, or control unclassified information training, from DoD. There's a process involved. Two things about the process. One thing that they did put into play around the CCP criteria is that they will allow military personnel, background in the military, people who've gotten out, people who've retired, to apply for CCPs without having to have the other certification criteria, like a college degree or 10 years experience or those types of things, as part of that. Because this is DoD, they wanted to make sure it was covered that way. So they do have that. prior military focus that allows people to get in there. Then they go through that training effort. A CCP can assist any assessor on an assessment activity, number one. A CCP is going to be and is designed to be the organizational subject matter expert about CMMC in its effort. That's why it's a 5-day training. That's why they cover everything that DoD has put out about CMMC within the CCP training efforts, is they got to cover all of it. And then the third thing is that they themselves can and may be participating, as I said, as an assessment team member. That is the foundational certification for all of the CMMC efforts as well, number 2. And number 3, they're the organizational subject matter experts. So there's 3 advantages to a CCP. The biggest one is they are officially certified. They get a credential. They're going to be working through those efforts. That credential stays with them. It's not assigned to whomever they're working for. It's theirs. And so it has a 3-year cycle, just like lots of other credentials have those types of 3-year cycles, like, you know, CISSP or CISM or any of the others that are out in the professional community in security. This is the same way. It's designed the same way as well.
Yeah, we have a whole bunch of questions coming in here related to that, so maybe we can touch on a couple of them quick.
Good.
So one is, do you have to have a technical background for an RP and a CCP? And as it says here, you know, you need to have a college degree in a technical field or some kind of equivalent experience, but you talk a little bit more about
RP, no. CCP, yes.
Perfect. And then we have another question coming in. They just want to know, what is the issue with RPs needing to be associated with an RPO? Like, I guess the question is, why can't you just be an RP and not be tied to anyone?
Basically, because an RP isn't a credential, it's just an assignment, a licensing rather than a credential. Number 1. Number 2, you're not going through a full certification with an RP. You're taking quizzes as you go along in the course. It's only 8 hours. Number 3, you're not proving that you have the background and understanding of what CMMC is by going through a full credentialing effort, a professional credentialing effort, which is what this CCP is. You're there to assist. You're there to work with you may be a subject matter expert in one particular area that's covered, or those types of things, which is what you can do with an RP. An RP is specifically focused on pre-assessments, gap analyses, those types of things, that type of effort, whereas a CCP covers all of the CCP domains, covers them in depth. So it's not focused on 1 or 2, it's all of it. And that's the big difference.
Yeah. And then we had a couple questions coming in from Jackie and Tara about security clearances and is a security clearance required? And Tara asked, like, does a DoD cert, like one of the 8570 or 8140 certs, like Security Plus, for example, help in any way? I guess, like, with being qualified would be the question. But it's security clearance required?
This is controlled, unclassified information, no clearance required. We're not talking about sensitive information that is national security level, anything at confidential or up. None of that is just here. This is the controlled but unclassified information side, so a clearance is not necessary. Background checks are, clearances are not. Okay, so do understand the differences there. All right, as far as that goes. Do professional certifications help? Absolutely. Do they provide some knowledge and areas for evaluation on a technical background, equivalent experience? Absolutely. So anything along the 8570 IAT, IAM levels, you know, the CND or whatever the SP levels, at CSSP levels they call them these days. Yeah, they all count. They all help because that shows that you've reached a certain level of understanding in the technical field already by doing that. So that can only help.
Great. Yeah, let's move on to the CCA slide here, and then we just have one or two more slides before we get into everyone's questions. So yeah, can you talk, Stacy, a little bit about the CCA? Obviously, you said you're going to be a C3 PAO, so you'll be employing these certified assessors. So can you talk just a little bit about the process and how that works and what it's like to be an assessor?
So first you have to be a CP, right? Everything starts off at that foundational level. So you take the CP class, get certified, take the exam, and you cruise on up to CCA if you want to be a certified assessor. And then there's the 3 levels of 1, 3, and 5. So you actually have to be a U.S. citizen, and you have to actually get a background check. Now, you're going to get a background check at CCP. So you have to get a tier 1 background check and an NAC check for CCA. And then what you do is after you get your CCA, you can, like a CP, right? Your CCA 1, you can go on level 1. So if you do CCA level 3, you can go 3 down to 1, and CCA 5 down to, all the way down, all of them. So it's the same process. You go to the marketplace, you apply online. They will let you know if you're approved, and then you move forward with the rest of the process, just like the CP. So it pretty much follows the same path, and it walks you through it on the CMMC AB website. It has all the details.
Yeah, and the screenshot is here from the ebook, which is in the handout section if anyone wants to grab that. I guess the one question that stood out to me here that I thought could potentially be a little bit interesting we're talking about is, in order to become an assessor, you have to actually schedule and observe an assessment, with the C3 PAO. So I don't know if you guys have any insight into like that process and how, I take an Infosec training, I become a certified assessor, and now it's like, okay, now I need to go conduct my assessment. Like, what do I do? Could you maybe elaborate a little on that?
Right, yeah, so you have to, C3 PAOs are the ones that either have CAs on staff, or they have them as 1099s or consultants. So you have to attach yourself or become employed or a 1099 to a C3 PAO. And then what you'll do is you'll go out with a team, well, 1 for level 1, but 3 people for a level 3 assessment. And then you'll actually go with that team. Now the fee for the first assessment is out there, and it's on their site. But to be honest, there's been no formal assessments yet. So we don't know exactly how that is going to work until we go through the process ourselves. So once the formal assessments start, we'll know more about that process and if it is indeed the fee that they state on the website. But you will be part of a C3 PAO when you're doing any formal assessment. But you're still an individual, right? You can still just be a consultant to any C3 PAO that's out there.
Yeah, and we're getting a lot of questions about the timeline for things, so maybe we can spend a minute or two on this slide here. So this is just kind of an overview of CMMC version 1 being released in January 2020, and you can see at the top here some information about when Infosec became LPPs and LTPs, and when we're planning on doing our training starting in July. We're going to have our CCP and CCA 1 classes, followed by CA3, and CCA 5 will be sometime in the future. But currently, in terms of timelines, we're expecting the beta versions of the CCP, that's a typo there, the CCA 1 and the CCA 3 to all be available in August, which is why we're starting our training in July. And then the full exams will release expected in November. So I think that's one question people might have, beta versions of the exam versus the full exams. And, if I take the beta, do I still become an official certificate? So can you talk a little bit about that?
The answer is yes. You do get a certificate. Your certificate is good for the 3-year window from the time you got the pass, okay, and you got the particular certification, so it doesn't matter whether it was the beta or the full. Okay, the big difference is us as provisional assessors, we're going to have to go through all the same as
Mhm.
you. And so when it finally does come out, the CCP, all the provisional assessors are going to have to go take the CCP and pass that exam. All the provisional assessors are going to have to go take a level 1, CCA 1, and pass the exam. All the provisional assessors are going to have to go and take CCA 3 and take the exam. Okay, we are not beta in. All right, that's why we're called provisional. Okay, so that's still there, but we're going to go through the whole process as well. Even though we will already have experience in doing some of these, that is not part of the process, but we all signed up for it knowing that ahead of time.
Yeah, we have another timeline question. Stephen's asking, when will formal assessments start? If you have any insights on that.
As soon as we get assessed and certified. So the DIPCAC, yeah, has started doing assessments, and as soon as the C3 PAOs are assessed and get certified and get the go-ahead, then we can start formal assessments.
Great, let me see if there's any more questions in here. Yeah, so related to the provisional assessors, we have someone who says that they're an RP and they would like to be a provisional assessor. Is that program over? Can you still become a provisional assessor? Is there a waiting list you can get on, anything like that?
No, that they did take a few more. They did take a few more provisional assessors, but I believe the program is over. Is that correct, Leighton?
It's closed.
Yeah.
Yes, it's closed.
All right, so yeah, let's move on to the Q&A. We have a couple of questions that came in pre-submitted via the email, so we'll get to those, and then we'll see if there's any other questions in the Q&A. So feel free to drop any in there if you still have questions after this conversation. So one of the questions I thought would be interesting to talk about is how big these certifications will get in the field of cybersecurity. I guess, you know, I hear 300,000 organizations, everyone needs to get assessed, and then you need to get reassessed every couple of years. Just wondering if you both could provide any context around like how many assessors are going to be needed, how many like RPOs and C3 PAOs are they going to be? Like, is there a lot of opportunity for up and comers, or is it mainly for people already kind of in the assessor sort of space and the DoD space? Just any context you can provide there?
789 companies have already applied to become C3 PAOs. So they're all going to need certified assessors. There are only 143 certified assessors as speak right now. That's it. There's only 143 provisional assessors. And so 300,000 companies, everybody needing a reassessment every 3 years, tells you that's going to be a huge market. Number one. Number two, other federal agencies have already started applying CMMC criteria and contracts and are in talks about bringing it on with their own agencies, not just DoD. Okay, including GSA has put it in their last 4 IDIQ that there's going to be CMMC provisions. We've got Department of DHS that's working on that. We've got several other federal agencies that are all looking at this as well. So it's only going to get very large, widespread, all around supply chain. So it's all going to be at contractor locations, not federal agencies, not being done on government installations. It's going to be being done at, you know, plants and manufacturing facilities all over literally the world. I mean, we have to remember that too. We got 10 to 15% of all defense contractors are foreign. So they're going to have it too.
Canada,
So,
yep.
Yeah, all over.
Everywhere.
I mean, Denmark is a huge, large subcontractor for the F-35 strike fighter for the current version of it. In fact, they just delivered one to the Lockheed plant in Texas 2 weeks ago, if you look at the press releases, you know, which means there's, you know, companies over there that are going to need it as well.
Yeah, so the next question here is from Tara. We covered a little bit of this, but Just talking about like what is the educational background and experience that's preferred for this certification? Is it best for those who already worked in DoD and have active clearances, or can entry-level folks without that stuff participate? What kind of career paths can this really help with? Is consulting the main one, or is there other career paths? So any advice there?
Any and all. I mean, you can jump in. Look at Leighton and myself. We've been in the field. Leighton's been there a little longer than I have, but we've been there for a long time, and we're jumping into this because obviously it's our passion, right? But you can start at entry level. I mean, I've got an executive chef in my organization who is rocking this cyber stuff. And I am proud to say that people are following the passionate people that want to help people and want to truly secure the dib. So you can start from the very beginning, or you can come in later in your career. You could become a certified professional and retire and be a consultant.
Right. It's the gambit. It runs from 18-year-olds up. Okay.
Yep.
And the only reason I say 18-year-olds up is because I got to have a background check.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah.
That's really the only reason that I say 18. It could be younger too, because there's certainly many who are qualified there, but because of that criteria, that effort is so it really isn't limited by educational background. It is not limited by experience criteria. Those are advantages to certain areas, certainly, but it is not a limitation either.
And the great thing is that you can pop in, look at the 17 domains. Maybe you really like, security assessments, scanning and pen testing, or maybe you really like doing incident response. And you can really, be offense, cyber defense. You can really find your passion because there's so much room for it in this certification program.
Yeah, and then we've had a lot of people in the chat, and as well as before the webinar, ask about the renewal process, the fees, the process to become RPOs, to get certified, all this kind of stuff. I guess my advice there would be to check the CMMC AB website, because a lot of it is still in flux, and there's definitely plans in place there, but they could change 3 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now. But is there anything either of you wanted to mention regarding the processes for any of those, or am I right on the money? Just like it's listed, but it's TBD.
Yeah, it's up there, and it's up with the renewal for being certified is 3 years. The renewal is pretty basic, and they do explain that very well.
Yeah, maybe this is a good question for you, Leighton. Craig was asking, will Infosec offer training to become a CMMC assessor? So could you maybe just touch a little bit on the process there?
Absolutely. I mean, Infosec and I reached out to each other relatively quickly after this all started, because I've been an Infosec instructor for 10 years anyway. So they asked about these efforts. And so, yes, Infosec is going to offer all the basic training, CCP, CCA1, and CCA3, and maybe CCA5 whenever it comes along, as the case may be. The CCP will be a 5-day training. CCA1 will be 3-day training. If I remember right, and CCA3 will be a 3-day training. Because they don't cover the same material, that's why they're not cumulative. Each one is different as far as those efforts, i.e. CCA1 covers what do you need to do an assessment. It doesn't cover what's in the model. That's in CCP. Okay, because everybody who's going for CCA1 has to be a CCP. That's the basic criteria as far as those efforts go.
Yeah, so we have a whole bunch of questions. We're not going to be able to get to them all, but maybe we can do a quick 60-second blitz through a couple of these if we keep the answers short here.
Sure.
So one person asked, is it necessary to have CCP professionals within an OSC? So if I'm trying to get certified, do I need to have a CCP? No. Perfect. And then Tara asked, what self-study options are offered versus enrolling in a boot camp?
The model's out there. The model is totally free and downloadable, including the 2 assessment guides, level 1 assessment and level 3 assessment guides are all downloadable from the DoD site already. So you can certainly use those to go through them. There's CMMC AB is still working through requirements around being able to sit for an exam. Does it require an in-person training, or can it be done self-study? There's a large discussion around that because of the ISO certification requirement around doing that. So that has not been determined yet. I'll be honest, we don't know yet.
All right, we'll do 2 more real quick questions. Natalie's wondering, do the requirements apply to existing contracts? I understand it applies to recompetes and new contracts only.
No, 171 is current. That's the SPRS reporting side. That stays, that's still there till 1 October 2025. That does not go away then. That's when the DFARS regulation kicks in and says all contracts will be CMMC. Before that point, it is pilots only. So current requirements under 171 stay until you get a CMMC certification before 1 October 25.
All right, well, we are over time here, so we're going to have to wrap it up. Apologies if we didn't get to your question, but reminder that we do have 2 more sessions coming up. We have our on May 13th, the CMMC rollout. We're going to focus that session on how CMMC will impact your organization. So we'll talk a lot about OSCs and C3POs and all that good stuff related more to those. And then June 16th, we're going to try to talk more about like what the assessment process is like. So we will be sending a follow-up email with links to those if you haven't registered already, as well as a recording to this and links to the slides, all of that good stuff. If you want to link to all the CMMC resources we have, if you go to infosecinstitute.com/CMMC, we have all of our webinars there. We have our ebook. We have links to all of our courses, all that stuff right there on that page. So that's probably the main resource that I would bookmark and check out if you're interested in knowing more. With that, I would just like to thank everyone today for joining. This webcast is going to end in just a moment, and a short survey will appear. We'd appreciate if you take a minute and complete the survey. It gives us the feedback and ideas for when we create future webcasts, so we know, what it is you enjoy about these or wish that we would improve. So on the last note, all live attendees today will automatically receive a certificate of attendance in their inbox. Special thanks to Leighton and Stacy for the great discussion today, and we hope to see you for the next CMMC webcast.
Hey, everybody.
Bye-bye.